Alright, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, going through a series of video presentations I'm creating based on the PowerPoint slides for the two textbooks that are being used for the Rankin Technical College Application and Web Development AWD1000 Web Development Technologies class. Alright, so far I've gone over all 20 chapters of Murox HTML5 and CSS3 4th edition, which is one book used for the course. And now I'm going through the second book, which is Murox JavaScript and jQuery 3rd edition. So far I've gone through the first 3 chapters, and now I'm going to start on Chapter 4, how to work with JavaScript objects, functions, and events. Alright, so let's get started. So it says, given the skills you've learned so far, code, test, and debug an application. Distinguish between text box objects, window objects, document objects, string objects, number objects, and date objects. Talk about parse int and parse float. Describe get element by ID, right and right line. Describe what focus does, what toFix does, how dates are used, how string objects are used in some of the methods. Distinguish between local and global variables. Talk about something fairly new to JavaScript called strict mode. All right, and start to get into event handlers. Now, I didn't talk about the confirm dialog box. All right. In my humble opinion, using prompt and using, prompt and alert, you really don't need confirm. All right. Alert tells you something and then has you close it. Confirm asks you a question, basically wants you to put in a yes or no. When you want to convert the strings, and everything you input into JavaScript is a string, if you want to convert it to a number, you use parse int and you use parse float. So there's an example of confirm. Are you sure you want to delete it? There's a prompt and a parse. There's a prompt and a parse. First one, you're parsing it into a whole number. The second one into a number with a decimal. Methods that you can use with the document object. Talked a little bit about get element by ID. When we get to chapter, I think it's chapter 6, we will talk about this in more depth and breadth of coverage. We get in and start talking about the DOM, or the document object model. All right, write and write line allow you to write right to a web page. The difference is, if I used to write, it would write it and leave the cursor right here. If I used a write line, it would write it and put the cursor at the beginning of the next line. All right, here's some examples. We're going to be using and doing stuff like this. More often than not, we'll use the shortcut $sign for this. So again, we'll work with the window object, the document object, look at the global object. We've talked a little bit already about NaN for not a number. Okay, let's assume I've got a form that I'm creating that asks you for first name, last name, etc., all the goodies. And I want the cursor when the form starts to run to be in the first field. Let's assume for a second the first field is asking you your social security number. So I can say the name of the field, the social security number dot focus, and that will put the cursor right at that field. Some properties of the text box object, value is the value that it holds. Disabled if you want to gray it out so people can't use it. When you work with numbers, so if I'm working with dollars and cents, I might want to use toFixed and put something, for example, to 2 decimal places. All right. Here's an HTML tag, and what's defined in here, the type is text. These are 2 different text boxes, one name first name, one name sales amount. When you start working with this stuff, you can use what's called chaining. What does that mean? Well, notice there's 1 dot here and 1 dot here. That's not chaining. With chaining, 1 dot, 2 dots, and you can keep going. This may not look important right now, but when we get into the second half of the book, when we talk about jQuery, it becomes much more relevant. All right. And they give you some examples of them, okay? So we will get into talking about objects. Again, I've said this to you before. I don't remember what chapter or chapters they talk about objects in depth and breadth of coverage. The last time that I taught this class, just as an FYI for you, all right, in here, we went over chapters 1 to 7 and 8 to 12 in a lot of detail. All right, the last week of class, I went through 13 to 18. So I did go through them. There just wasn't a lot of time to give them the depth and breadth of coverage that they probably deserved. So if you create a date object, it holds the date and it holds the time, and you can see a lot of different stuff you can do with this. Strings, the same kind of thing. All right. Now let's see if I can find that. I am going to recommend in here, like I said, I've got to look and see if I can find this. Let's see. Hot dog. Years ago, there was a site out there that was called hunlock.com. All right? And if you went out to that site, you got this really, really ugly site, okay? I'm not going to lie to you. But probably the best site I've ever seen for JavaScript. It had a tutorial, talked about numbers, strings, arrays, functions, JSON, which is JavaScript object notation, dates, and AJAX, which is asynchronous JavaScript and XML. All right, I'm leaving this up here. But I believe, unless it's changed, if I go out to hunlock.com, it said this for the last couple years. All right? But you should be able to put this in there. So let's try that. Nope, not found. What I will do, though, is I will provide... I'm going to do it right now. Now that is way too long to expect somebody to put in, so I will provide that URL to the classes. Okay. You can see it's been archived. In fact, one of my students found it for me. So dates are objects, they have properties, they have methods. Strings are objects, they have properties, they have methods. All right. Right here, when you look at this, it says here a function expression with no parameters that doesn't return a value. We're not giving the function a name right there, so that particular function is called an anonymous function. Okay. There are different ways that we can write functions. You'll be introduced to them in the class. You'll also be introduced, and again, we'll talk about it in more depth and breadth of coverage, I think starting in Chapter 6, to what's called the DOM, or the Document Object Model. I've mentioned this to you before. What I'm doing in these, or what's being done in these 1, 2, 3 lines right here, is we are saying, hey, rather than having to type in document.getElementById, just type in $. This is an alias for this. Why? Because it results in a lot less typing on your part. Less typing means less chance for mistakes. All right, here we're returning a value, but before we return it, we're putting it to 2 decimal places. Now, when you declare it, you can declare a function and give it a name as well. This is the way it almost always used to be done. So we're going to look at both those ways of declaring a function. Here we're passing in 2 values or 2 parameters. One we'll call subtotal, one we'll call tax rate, and we're returning a value called tax. So here's how we can call that function. And again, if that stuff doesn't make a boatload of sense, probably it shouldn't right now, but it hopefully will when we get into this in more depth and breadth of coverage. That's why I said it's not my intention in here to go through all this in detail, because first of all, the lectures would be too long, and second of all, there's probably a lot of material in here that people would get confused by. All right. If you put use strict at the top of your program, that's called the JavaScript Directive. And what that will do was it will make, if you remember in an earlier lecture, I talked about the fact that I equated JavaScript to somebody playing an electric guitar, where if they're not that good or they lose a string, they just play louder, as opposed to having an acoustic guitar. If you break a string, people will know. Well, what I'm getting to on this, and the reason I'm telling you this, is JavaScript by default, which means unless told otherwise, JavaScript is not very picky. It's very liberal, if nothing else. But if you want it to act more conservatively, you could put use strict at the top of your program. So best coding practices, use local variables whenever possible. Local variables are variables that are defined inside of a function. So they're local, or they're only known to that function. When you declare all variables, use the var keyword. Use strict mode. You just saw that right now. Declare variables for a function at the start of a function. Be consistent. All right. Different things that happen. JavaScript is referred to as an event-driven programming language, which means it sits there and waits for things to happen. You can have a program that gets loaded into memory. You can click a button. When you move from one field on a form to another, you get a blur on the field that you were in and a focus on the new field. So all of this stuff that you see in here, plus a lot more, can have what are called event handlers associated with them, which means there'll be some code. Here's an example that says, I want to attach this join list routine, so when I click the button called submit button, this will run. Okay? And again, you are going to see many, many, many examples of this. This is very heavy code in here, taking JavaScript and attaching event handlers to it. All right, you will see examples of it though. There's a miles per gallon application, and here's the code. We will write something like this in class. We'll also write code to verify that the miles driven were positive, for example, the gallons used were positive, for example. All right, you'll notice right here they disabled this. In other words, they made it read only, and that's why it's gray. There's the line that did that. We'll look at this email list example in a lot of depth and breadth of coverage as well. All right, we'll put in a clear button. Think about it. There's 4 things we want to have happen when we click that button. We want whatever value is in here to clear out, whatever value is in here to clear out, whatever value that's in here to clear out, and we want what's called the focus to go to this field right here. And that pretty much is it for this chapter. Again, I realize I'm glossing over a lot of the code. All right. In the next chapter, when we come back, we're going to go over how to test and how to debug a JavaScript application. I'll be back with that particular lesson in just a couple minutes.